So I say Genesis, you say?
Remind me what Genesis is about.
I say Genesis, what comes to mind?
Rebirth.
Phil Collins.
Moses.
Second book in the Bible?
Kind of scary.
So I say Genesis, you say?
Jesus.
Fish.
I say Genesis, you say?
Sega.
I feel like the Genesis sign.
And when was the last time you read the book of Genesis?
Oh, I don't know if I have.
No.
Yeah.
No. Never.
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 Probably never.
If you think the book is so universal, has so many universal messages, why do you think more people don't read it?
I think the Bible's getting some bad PR lately.
I mean, it's 2,000 years old, and it should not be adapted for modern times.
In the last few years, my life has changed drastically. I was a filmmaker who made psychological thrillers, and then I found myself married with children.
Give Daddy a kiss.
Mwah! My life was no longer just about me, it was about them. And I began to look at the world differently. I started to notice a decline in values and kindness and support that I never paid attention to before. And I asked myself, are my films making the world a better place for my family to live and grow up in? I looked inside, and the tough, honest answer was no. What could I do to help fix things? I started a journey looking for answers. Why are we losing touch with the spirit of camaraderie and brotherhood and morality that I remember from growing up in Chicago? Where could I find some guidance, some answers, some instruction manual that could tell me how the world should be? I read book after book on philosophy and history and ethics, but they all fell short. And then I opened a book that I hadn't read since I was a kid, the Bible. And I read it. I mean, I really read it. And I realized the guiding principles for how to create a healthy, functioning society are all right there in the book of Genesis. I couldn't believe it. Genesis? Really? But there it was in black and white. And the more I read, the more I wanted to read it again and again. And I finally reached a turning point where I had to make a choice. Do I stay on the path that I'm on, or do I try to change the world for the better? I decided to begin studying to become a rabbi. So now I'm trying to make the world a better place for my kids, but in order to do that, I need to share what I've discovered with as many people as I can. What better way to do that than to combine my new love of the Bible with my old passion for filmmaking? Genesis holds the keys to how to fix our economy, how to value relationships, how to build a family, how to speak to one another, how to combat racism, and how to plan for the future. But who would listen to me? What are my credentials? Genesis is a universal book meant for all of us. I knew I needed to reach out to the best and brightest to help make the case for Genesis. Governor, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Nolan, great to be with you. It's a real pleasure. Okay.
Let's have a seat.
All right. Genesis is a roadmap for life.
It's a roadmap for faith.
Genesis is insight into the human condition.
Genesis is a reminder that no man or woman is an island.
It's a blueprint for each and every one of us.
But it's far more than a textbook.
It gives you the ability to think for yourself.
It can also serve as a pretty severe warning about what could go wrong when we don't place human dignity at the center of that conversation.
The Torah has to be something that we have to really bring back into our lives and not have it something separate from who we are, not compartmentalized, but make an inherent part of every step we take in this world.
So when people say the Bible is real, what they're really saying is that ancient people somehow have more knowledge of it, somehow more wiser. That's silly, right?
We're not even talking about the ancient Greeks, and we're talking about a tribe of wandering Middle Eastern herdsmen. I mean, why would they have any wisdom?
The lens that Genesis provides as to how we see ourselves, how we see other people around us, how we see the community, the environment, and God, that lens that comes from Genesis, and it has influenced us in both in the religions of the Western world and in the general culture of the Western world for thousands of years now. No other text can really say that.
All people are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That's from the Declaration of Independence, not the Bible. But notice that the entire American experiment in democracy is predicated on the lessons of the first two chapters of the book of Genesis.
You know, when I was very young,
They came out with the Revised Standard Version that was a successor to the King James Version. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles took to the radio to explain to the people what was going to happen when the text they'd gotten used to, in English, of course, not in Hebrew or Greek, was being changed. And this was a moment of enormous cultural importance. I don't think that would be something that the Secretary of State would do now.
We're losing collective texts. 50 years ago, 40 years ago, I could make a reference to Potiphar's wife, and everybody in the class would know what I was talking about. Today, the students will say, what case is that? Was that a New York case or a California case?
If you don't study Genesis, then you don't understand the underpinnings of much of what our society is built on. Its conception of family, its day of rest and weekends, all of the stuff that we take for granted, exile and birth and rebirth, all of that, sin, God. You can walk around with a jumble of ideas in your head, but if you want to actually understand where they came from, if you want to be their master rather than their servant, you have to read the book of Genesis.
If you cut yourself off from that, what is influencing you?
We want to be our own gods. We want to run our own lives. We want to sit on the throne, make up our own rules.
The most important thing is loss when people reject the God who made them. But it is a fact that this is the direction that Western cultures have gone, including the one that our culture is going in.
If they said to me, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God, I'd say, yeah. I'll tell you about as much truth as the people who wrote that Bible. How do you like that?
If there are 6+ billion people on earth, and I singularly establish myself as above them all and above God himself to be able to say, I'm going to write the template. Is there anything more arrogant than that?
I believe that Genesis, for America in particular, is a sort of cautionary tale in many ways. You look at the Tower of Babel, you look at Noah's Ark, you look at Sodom and Gomorrah, you saw man becoming arrogant.
We need direction. We need a perspective of life. We need to teach morality.
Very, very fundamental questions about purpose ultimately will drive us back to a Genesis-type context. And so, obviously, it's the book of beginnings.
I probably would start at the beginning with Genesis chapter 1.
Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
If I only had this one verse, I would need nothing else in my life.
From the very first time that I had, my own Bible, I felt that it was an extraordinary revelation of God, and at times it would be overwhelming to me that he wanted me to know him.
It's the story of origins by which I've organized my life and my ministry.
Genesis isn't only about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's about the beginnings of creation, the beginning of all human life, the beginning of everyone.
It feels something like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
You just think, in the beginning, all those people talking about Big Bang and how did it all get started and what's the origin of life and the like, and there you have this wonderful book that starts off with these words.
In the beginning, God. In the beginning, God.
We were at Niagara Falls, and I looked at her with like my throw the mic down moment where I'm like, look at this majestic scene. Like, how can you look at this and tell me there's no God? And then she took my hand and she brought me over to the sign that explained how Niagara Falls was made. And I was like, well, I'm sorry.
We're told in the beginning was God.
It establishes the eternality of God, who has no end and has no beginning. The eternal isness of God. He never was. He never began because he always has been. It's those kinds of grammatical and linguistics acrobatics that we do, trying to explain the inexplicable.
The Hebrew text reads, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, which is often translated as, in the beginning of God's creation of the heaven and earth. And it's the second Hebrew word, bara, translated to create or creation of. Bara is one of those words in biblical Hebrew which is only used with God as its subject. And the fact that you can have a word in Hebrew which has only God as its subject seems to suggest that the way in which God creates is fundamentally different than the manner in which humans are able to create. So that if I were asked to translate Genesis 1:1, the way I would probably have to translate it as, in the beginning of God's creation, open parentheses. That is the best word that I could find because this word is never used about humans when they create or fashion anything, close parentheses, of the heavens and the earth.
The way in which God creates is awesome. It's a form of creation that we human beings cannot imitate. But we can at least try to be creative in our own way.
To fill the earth, and I don't think that means just filling the earth with babies, but it means filling the earth with the stuff that we human beings add to the garden. That in the end, God just doesn't want a couple naked people in a garden. He wanted them to sing some songs. He wanted them to draw pictures in the sand. He wanted them to create primitive technology.
Condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, 10 years ago, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. The printing press came this year. And then, less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine. This country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them.
Got to do something, and that's what this verse is telling us, and this is the very first verse, action.
In the span of 100 years, our country has grown from an uncharted wilderness to an area of great wealth and productivity. Perhaps the largest single factor in the growth and development of cities has been the mechanical advances in all forms of manufacturing. This growth led to further growth.
I think the fact that God is a creator God tells me a lot of things about who he is. He's not a God that just lives with what is. He lives with what he makes and what he creates. I'm in his image. He tells me later that I was created in his image. If he's a creator, then he has built in me an innate sense of creativity.
The West was trained to be creators, to be in God's image, to make things. So we didn't have a quiescent God, a quiet God, a God who was passive. Rather, we had a God who shaped the world, and so we learned to be like that.
The last few decades haven't been easy for manufacturing in this country. New technology has made businesses more efficient and productive, and that's good. But it's also made a lot of jobs obsolete.
We lost 3,000 jobs over the course of the last 5 years.
It's really, really sad.
When have you worked here?
32 years.
The Indianapolis GM stamping plant closed its doors for good today after 80 years in business.
And as GM goes, so goes the neighborhood. Bars, businesses boarded, a neighborhood changed, an era ends, and workers walk away.
Capitalism is broken. In other words, we need to restore the balance of capitalism so that we have the job creation you want, so we have the tax revenue he wants. That's the real issue.
We need to build. The American manufacturing heart has been cut out of this country. We used to build trains and subways and airplanes for the world. Now we read about trains running 300 miles an hour in France and China, and we piddle along ourselves on Amtrak like we're on a buckboard. We don't build because we have neither the money nor the courage to do it.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
That's about all I can give you because that's about as far as I've gotten.
That's as far as you've read?
That's about as far as I've read. I've gotten no further than that.
Why not? Why did you stop reading?
Doesn't interest me, that's all.
I'm not super religious.
I mean, it's old, like there's importance to it, but I don't really think that it's relatable to like nowadays.
Would you want your kids to read it?
I wouldn't push it on them, but if they do read it, then I'm not going to say, why are you reading the Bible? But at the same time, like I said, I'm not going to push it on them either.
If they do pick it up to read it, would you hope they get past, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth?
Yes, I do.
We in the modern world who think we're creating all of this new technology and moving quickly, we really should be, I think, a tad more thoughtful about the ramifications of that. I think Genesis 1:1 is more relevant now than it has ever been before.
It insists that the world as it was initially created is tov me'od, very good, and that if we tend to mess it up, that is our problem.
He took the world that was chaos and made it into order. If man's left to himself, he takes a world of order and creates chaos.
One of the deep sadnesses in my life is to find out that human beings have lost that sense of concern for the earth and the willingness to be unselfish, to be altruistic for the sake of future generations. My great-great-grandfather, Little John, loved the land that he farmed in the Central Valley. I knew his son, who farmed the same land. I knew the deep concern that my parents had as environmentalists. And now I see that my children and the children around us have taken for granted that this would be a paved over state. Sad, sad, sad that we would think that our pleasure now is all that counts any longer.
We don't poison it, we don't corrupt it, that we're here not to just bend all of non-human creation to our own purposes, but rather we're placed in the garden as caretakers of the garden.
The way you take care of it is you steward it, you shepherd it, you leave it better than you found it.
The mission for Heal the Bay is to have a clean, fishable, swimmable bay, coastal waters, inland waters, watersheds, having them safe, healthy, and clean for us and for the marine life that lives there as well.
So I'm looking here at McDonald's cups, cigarette butts, and a pair of shoes. How does somebody forget their shoes at the beach? Here we see lots of plastic, lots of dirty napkins,
socks,
a used sock, right.
Yes. Balloons are actually one thing that we really, really stress about, not releasing balloons into the air. When the balloons pop, they actually sort of implode from the bottom, so then it looks like they're fringed and they look just like a jelly, a sea jelly. And when that goes back in the water, that's one of the most common things that you find in turtle stomachs. I think the feeling that it's someone else will take care of it, but then that leaves it up to everyone else.
Thank you for being here on Jewish Federation Community Service Day. This is our beach cleanup, of course.
It's such a shame when you see all of this trash, and it's not just a matter of, I can understand something happens, you make a mistake, you don't realize you've dropped something, but it's just that you see all of these people sitting here at the beach, and it's just a matter of nobody cares. You have to make a stand at some point and say, I care about this.
How do you feel when you literally are walking in front of people sitting on lounge chairs, throwing trash on the beach, and you're cleaning up their trash?
Well, we've gotten some weird looks as we're going up and down the beach cleaning up trash, and even one girl came up to us and actually threw her trash into our trash bag rather than the trash cans that are all over. So it makes the situation a little awkward, I guess you could say.
Did you grow up religious?
I grew up going to religious school. I grew up Reformed. A lot of our services were social action and taking care of the environment and people, but also at the end of the day, you got to do it for yourself.
Did you grow up religious?
I didn't, but I don't think it matters, because I don't think the beach or the ocean or the animals care about religion. It just matters that you do it.
Creation is a joint process. We have an obligation to help in the repair of the world.
There was chaos eternally. And at that very spot where the chaos is most chaotic, that's where the divine energy summons it into order. So creating always happens at the spot of chaos, and it is never from nothing. It's always inviting creation to organize itself, to become something. That, I think, is an invitation for us as well. Not to give in to the chaos, not to expect ourselves to be passive in this process, but with God to be co-creators.
Studying in rabbinical school settled the chaos in my life. I was finally on a path that I believed was leading me to answers. And throughout this entire life-changing process, I've had my wife Blair for love, for support, and for guidance. She married a filmmaker, and she got a rabbi. Nonetheless, Blair has supported me all along the way, and I couldn't have done this without her, my kids, and my entire family's support, because no journey is traveled alone.
One of the most beautiful things in the Bible is very subtle. When God says to Abraham, "Go you," the you in Hebrew is singular. It's just you, Abraham. But Abraham goes with Sarah. And it's the beginning of learning that the only way that you can truly understand yourself, just as with Adam and Eve in the garden, is if you find someone else to mirror your soul.
Adam, Eve, to me, that's very important.
You believe that's the way the world was created?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we all believe that that's the way the world was created.
Do you think Genesis or the Bible, do you think it's still relevant in your life?
Not at all.
Why so?
Because I believe in evolution.
Oh. And you can't believe in evolution and the morals or the teachings of Genesis at the same time?
I don't think so.
It's settling to know, your origin, why you're here, how you're here, who created you. If you want to live up to a standard, you got to know where you came from.
You don't believe me if I say there was one cell or many cells, and one cell eat the other, and they just do symbiosis. You don't believe that?
I believe it happened in the order. I think even science will tell you it happened in that order of the fish and then the animals and then God and man was last.
The world was created exactly like it says in Genesis.
Sure, 6 days, whatever. The Bible says that, to a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years a day is to God. But, I'm not smart enough to figure God out. I just trust and have faith that what it says is true.
I say Genesis. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Senior moment? I have a lot of them. And they're getting closer together.
The human endeavor is so delicate. The fact that we can even communicate is a miracle.
Genesis 11:7. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech.
Chapter 11 in the Tower of Babel is hugely important. The Tower of Babel has humans deciding that they want to make themselves great.
Man wanted to build a tower to reach the very heavens, in many ways to be like God. God disperses them, he punishes them, in effect, by mixing up their languages.
Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Confused languages, the scattering of people. It's really the judgment of God on a people who were spinning out of control away from him. It was building up of themselves. It was worshiping God's creation, but forgetting God as creator.
The parallel today with the Tower of Babel, the story that we see in Genesis 11, it's really seen in the halls of power here in Washington, D.C.
Unfortunately, Congress has not fulfilled its responsibility.
The Senate has continued to reject our offers.
It's happening because of a reckless Republican shutdown in Washington.
We don't want to shut government down. We just want to cut spending.
But under the Constitution, there's a way to resolve this process, and that is to go to conference and talk through your differences.
People are not communicating with each other from a perspective of mutual respect.
The challenge is for us to listen to each other when we're speaking languages that we can barely understand.
Drop the liberal thing.
No,
wait,
Joe,
let me make my point and then you can dismiss me.
Can you explain this crap for us?
It's a confusion of modes of discourse, of the things that we say out of our own life situations, out of our own in-group kinds of discussions.
As I began making this documentary, my vision for this project began to round into form. And as I searched for more and more people to participate from different perspectives, one name kept coming up again and again and again: Ken Ham. He was recommended by several Christian leaders as one of the most popular Christian spokespeople for the book of Genesis today. In 2007, he founded the Creation Museum in Kentucky. Recently, Ken Ham represented the creationist perspective in a widely watched debate with Bill Nye the Science Guy, which took place at the Creation Museum. The Creation Museum is a theme park that tries to bring the book of Genesis to life. And I knew that's where I needed to go.
Well, I was trained as a science teacher in Australia, and I was a Christian. The children really want answers to where do we come from, who are we, how did we get here, and what about the dinosaurs? One of the burdens I had every time we went to a secular museum was always from an evolutionary perspective. That's where the vision began for the Creation Museum. When people say Genesis is no longer relevant to society today, what they're really saying is we want to determine what's right and what's wrong. We don't want to be accountable to a God who owns us, who sets the rules. Genesis is the history that God has revealed to us concerning who we are, where we came from, that is actually the history that's foundational to every biblical doctrine, foundational to the whole of the rest of the Bible.
Tonight, a biblical-based theme park is creating controversy. Answers in Genesis built the Creation Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky, with exhibits from the pages of the Bible.
Why can't we have a Creation Museum? Why can't we have a place that helps people understand the history in the Bible is true? And to show them the scientific evidence actually confirms the Bible's history. God made all the land animals on day 6. That includes dinosaurs. The word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841. It's just a modern word that includes a certain group of animals. So they were made on day 6. 2 of each kind of land animal went on board Noah's Ark, which must have included the dinosaurs. And the word kind, when God made kinds of animals, he made the dog kind. You can have lots of species of dogs. That's not evolution. Even young children can understand these things.
You have to take a side. And if you don't take a side, you know, if you believe in evolution, you're not allowed to read Genesis because that's against your beliefs.
If you look at the story of creation, number one, 6 days, a day for God could be millions of years. So that's cool.
In those specific days is a give or a take. I think being spiritual and I think living a spiritual life and understanding that there is a God is what's key.
When a high school student says to me, I can't believe in Genesis because I believe in science, I'll say, good, we have a great place to start together because I believe in science too.
When Philo, who lived in the 1st century, interpreted Genesis, he interpreted Genesis according to the science of his time, which was Plato's Timaeus, basically. Maimonides, living in the 12th century, interpreted Genesis, the exact same text. He interpreted it in terms of the science of his time, which was Aristotle's Book 12 of the Metaphysics. And then when Darwin came along, right, there are different stages in terms of the development of the world, and especially of living things. And Genesis is more roughly what Darwin was talking about. And now we have astrophysics, which gives us a very different understanding of how worlds are created, how stars are created. For me, it's very comfortable to interpret those texts along these lines. I don't have to worry about the literal meaning of these texts, because my ancestors have already interpreted these texts in these very different kinds of scientific ways.
I know there are other approaches. People try to avoid the truth of God's presence, God's judgment, if you will, by taking texts and stripping them of literal truth in favor of some other imagined lesson in many cases. People try to avoid the truth of God's word by assigning text to allegory.
The question of the scientific record versus Genesis is kind of a false dichotomy. The scientific record is not going to disavow the truths of God, and neither are the truths of God going to disavow a scientific record.
You think kids that talk about the Bible are bullied?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen that in your life?
I had specific events that happened to me, being Jewish, growing up in Salt Lake City, the impacts that happened to me from kids I don't think necessarily knew, elementary ages, but you know, a swastika was drawn on my desk before, and I don't think they know the impacts, but as a young Jewish adult learning about the Holocaust, I knew the impacts, so I think some think it's more fun and it turns into bowling.
And do you think those kids that did it, do you think they read Genesis? Don't you think they were also religious?
Very well, possibly.
Interpretation is shaped by any number of social variables, which includes their race, their religious background, their socioeconomic class. To use any part of the Bible is to make a decision about what's meaningful and what's not meaningful.
And I was a little boy, and I was taking piano lessons. I was the only black boy at this school of music. And the owner of the school decided one day he was going to take all of the students on this amusement area, which was a cruise on the Admiral up and down the Mississippi River, docked in St. Louis. So I can see it like yesterday. My dad's on the left side, and my mom's on the right side. And we come down to the bottom, and you kind of go walk down this hill to the landing dock, and at the bottom there are these two big men, white man dressed in all white, who I learned was the captain, and then one next to him with a Smokey the Bear hat on. He was a cop, like this, biggest white man I ever seen in my life, huge guy. And I walk down, and this guy says, where are y'all going? And my mother says, well, we're going on the Admiral. And the man said, not today, you're not. And my mother said, no, you don't understand. We're with the Shields School of Music. And all the students in the Shields School of Music are going on the, all the students are going on the Admiral. They've rented out part of the boat. And this big white cop says, we don't allow niggas on this boat. And my dad said, no, you don't understand. We're with the Shields School of Music and Shields School of Music, and all the students are going on this boat today. And the man said, niggas don't go on this boat. You might as well turn around, because if you don't, I'm going to put you in jail. And put his finger in my dad's face and said, we don't allow niggas on this boat. I was a little boy, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old. I'll never forget. I'm 65 years old. And to this day, I remember the look. When I turned and looked up, my dad was on the left side, looked at my dad's face, and the look on his face when that white man said, we don't allow niggas on this boat. And I, from age 10, 11 years old, I guess I became a racist. I'm a recovering racist. Recovering because I later learned that I'm more than that. And more than me being more than that, God says I'm more than that. His word says I'm more than that.
Each one of us needs to judge our actions and attitudes against the absolute authority of the Word of God and not look down on another person because they're of a different people group or have some different surface characteristics in regard to their physical bodies. People have this idea there are lower races and higher races and primitive and advanced. The Tower of Babel, to me, reminds us that we're all descendants of Adam, we're all one race, we're all equal before God.
The Tower of Babel was a blessing, the blessing of difference, of diversity, of different tongues and different perspectives. That was a legacy of Babel. A world in which there was only one culture and one language and one way of being would be an infinitely poorer world.
If we really think about it, and I don't care if you're religious or not, or spiritual or not, no human beings ever on the face of this earth are exactly the same. Ever. That's a truly remarkable thing.
That's right, man, because we live in a crazy time where Dr. King and Mr. Mandela's dreams are coming true, and black people and white people and Asians, Indians, and everybody's hanging out together. They have interracial posses. It's unbelievable what's going on, man. Unbelievable. All my black friends have a bunch of white friends, and all my white friends have one black friend.
God wants diversity. God wants us to challenge each other.
The challenge of any society is to recognize that, yes, we try to better ourselves. There's nothing wrong with that. But hopefully we also better a society at the very same time.
Because of Babel, we're not able to discern the meta-narrative anymore. And so we get into these conflicting narratives.
There's a segment of the country that does not want to honor God. The other segment of the country goes back to those biblical values, which are outlined in Genesis, really.
That's really the battle that's in our culture today. And what we're saying is, hey, unless we get back to the authority of God's word beginning in Genesis, then we're going to see the whole of society collapse.
We have so much Babel, confusion of many tongues and no common narrative, no common reference point for values, for truth, for beauty, and other things. We can find that meta-narrative in the Bible that can give us a more coherent and integrated way of finding more peaceable relationships among human beings.
And where are you from?
I'm from San Antonio, Texas, but I'm actually enrolling as a student in the Divinity School in the fall here at Harvard.
So, I say Genesis, you say?
Story, the beginning of a very important story. There's an idea in what I study, Christian ethics, that ethics should begin with story. It's called narrative ethics, because the community tells itself who it is, what's important to it, what its values are, through stories.
It's fascinating how at the same time we're seeing two things simultaneously. One is a very strong emphasis on individualism, and the other is all these sociological studies coming out that say that the quality of your life is dependent almost entirely on the quality of your relationships. And one of the things that enhances relationships is sharing experiences, ideas, and stories. And when we share the stories of our collective culture, which is the stories of Genesis, we discover that we can draw closer to others because their story is ours.
One of my very favorite stories in Genesis is in the 50th chapter. It's the story of when Joseph had been sold into slavery by his brothers. They left him for dead. Turned out that he ended up a high officer in Pharaoh's house. By his being there, he ended up saving his country and his family. They thought that he was certainly going to take revenge on them, but he made this statement. He said, "What you intended for my harm, God used for good." That one truth has been so very powerful to me, because there are moments in my life when I thought something that was happening to me was the worst thing that could have happened. Later, I would come to realize that my detour was my destination, that it really was the best thing. And I can go back to when I was 11 years old and I broke my finger playing Little League baseball, ending my promising Little League career. But that led me to working in the press box at the little kiddie baseball park, announcing the batters. I lived in such a small town that the local radio station broadcast Little League games, if you can imagine how boring that must have been. And when the normal play-by-play sportscaster got sick, and the manager came out, he turned to me and said, "Hey kid, would you like to call a few innings of baseball?" At age 11, I did my first radio broadcast. And he looked at me and he said, "You know what, kid, you're not too bad. When you're 14 and can get your FCC license, come see me, I'll give you a job." I did. And that was life-changing for me.
I think individuality is not a bad thing at a certain level. But when individuality is pursued without God, it results in chaos.
People misunderstand what individualism means. Me being me means being separate from you. But that's wrong. It turns out everything that exists in relationship to everything else. There is nothing that exists outside of relationship. The challenge is to find your integrity within the network of connections and relationships that makes it possible to live a meaningful life.
See, I believe Genesis 5 is a critical link in the chain.
This is the account of the descendants of Adam. On the day that God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. And then it goes on and it gives you who gave birth to whom, who gave birth to whom.
The text gives us a genealogy from Adam all the way to the sons of Noah.
To my mind, the genealogies, such as the one in Genesis chapter 5, suggest that the world is structured so that there are 10 generations between Adam and Noah. There are going to then be a comparable number of generations between Noah and Abraham. And this helps to structure or organize the stories within the book of Genesis.
The rabbis argue, which is the most important passage in the Bible? And they give different opinions. Is it ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, I should love my fellow as myself? There is the opinion, no, the verse I just read to you. This is the chronology, the book of chronology of mankind. And what is he arguing? This is the most important verse in the entire Bible. That's correct. That's the general moral lesson that everything is pinned on. Ze Sefer Toldot Adam. We all come from the same book of creation.
All human beings are being traced to a common ancestor. And to me, the significance of that is we are all family.
Genesis 14:14. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house and went in pursuit as far as Dan in the north.
In Genesis 14, we see Abraham's war to save his nephew Lot. And look, the odds were stacked against him. His companions, his kinsmen, they were outnumbered. Things look kind of bleak, but they prevail.
Abraham goes to fight for his nephew Lot, puts his life on the line. Who would do that? That's a lesson that's rarely taught today. The centrality of the family. Family is more important than any other group in one's life.
This year, my daughter's bat mitzvah will be on the first year yard site of her grandfather. And so where you come from and who is descended from you matters. People like being connected to previous generations and want to think that the impact of their life will transcend their death.
My great-great-grandfather, Judah Rosenblum, was a sofer, a scribe. When I walk through the collection and I look at 500,000 volumes in this library, I frequently think of him and at just how he would enjoy being in such a place. We're looking at a late 11th century codex of the 5 books of Moses.
So it's almost 1,000 years old.
Almost 1,000 years old. I see a part of the chain of tradition that connects ourselves and our modern printed texts back to an ancient world, a people that doesn't conserve their tradition may find that they've lost it.
The fact that Christians and Jews have a common heritage means that there's no escaping what ought to be an incredible bond. On one of my many trips to Israel, I was with a group of Jewish friends. I was the only Gentile in the group. And one of the conversations that we were having was, why are so many, particularly evangelical Christians, very, very supportive of Israel and the Jewish right to a safe and secure homeland? And I think it was somewhat of a bewilderment to them. And I said, let me explain something. A person cannot be Christian and not be totally connected to Judaism. Because everything that people believe in the Jewish faith, I believe as a Christian. It's the very essence and foundation upon which my own Christian faith is based.
We would not have Genesis if it were not for the Jewish community saying this is sacred scripture. The Christian community ratified that judgment and built it into the canon of the Christian Bible.
So much art and literature has been rooted in the biblical text.
In looking at a novel like Moby Dick, where we have characters with biblical names like Elijah and Ahab and Ishmael, it's certainly not more than 9th grade literature to conclude that Melville assumed that his readers would pick up on that. They would know the stories.
Shakespeare's plays presuppose biblical values. Macbeth, you know, the betrayal of a trusted friend in your own house.
The truth is, you can't understand Shakespeare without understanding the Bible. You can't understand Chaucer. You can't understand Freud, certainly.
I remember my teacher, Reb Shlomo Kalbach. He once said, it's rare to see a literature professor walk out of a class on Shakespeare and close the book and kiss Shakespeare. But when you finish a shiur, a class in Chumash, in Torah, or in the Talmud, you close the book, you kiss it.
When we read Shakespeare, we don't say, this is the word of the Lord, thanks be to God, and we shouldn't. Shakespeare speaks, but in a different way.
Where you're from?
I'm from Brooklyn, New York.
When I say Genesis, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
The Bible.
Have you ever read it?
I've read certain parts of it. I come from a religious family, although I didn't choose to adopt that religion for my own lifestyle. My yoga instructor is in charge of like helping me with my spiritual cleansing, I would say. I'm not sure if that's the proper term.
How do we deal with this in our postmodern context where reading ancient texts isn't always the most interesting thing?
People know the Walt Disney characters more than they know the characters in Scripture. Why that has happened, I suppose many people could give different answers, but it's a great loss.
So when we have generations who say, well, I don't believe Genesis, what it does affect is then how their children, grandchildren, and others view Scripture itself. And so what we see is a generational loss of biblical authority. 2/3 of young people are walking away from the church by the time they reach college age.
I grew up in Highland Park, Illinois, a terrific little suburb outside of Chicago, undeniably middle America. I grew up with a sense of values taught to me by my parents and the community. I was constantly surrounded by family. And then somehow, I pursued the Hollywood lifestyle. I came to Los Angeles where very often the shoes you wear and the car you drive is more important than the type of person you are. I came to Los Angeles to pursue Hollywood, but it was here that I found my rabbinical school.
God does not give pre-flight itineraries. He trusts us and challenges us to trust him one step at a time.
Genesis 12, 1 and 2. The Lord said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing.
The obedience of Abraham to the Israelite deity becomes hugely important.
This is the first journey. It's interesting that Abram has to leave home.
Land of your parents, land of your families, land of your origin, land of your comfortability. But you must leave here.
We so easily think that staying put is sort of like God's will. Couldn't disagree more. God wants our lives to be a constant state of adventure, of growth, and development.
To hear the voice of God is to stand up from that place where you find yourself and to begin moving outward. It's impossible not to see the American heritage in this.
Genesis 28:16 says, then Jacob woke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.
And he has a magnificent vision of a ladder with its feet on the ground and going all the way up to heaven, and angels go up and down upon it. He wakes up, and he recognizes that he's a changed person. God is and will be with him. God can be found everywhere.
Because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world.
You might have a great job opportunity across the country. It's the great unknown in many ways. You don't know what's going to greet you there, but you're ready to take that leap of faith.
You and I are Abrahams. Every human being is an Abraham. Every one of us is on a journey. Our lives are a journey. So the question is, where's that journey going to lead me?
I was 12 and a half, and I developed what was diagnosed as a terminal inoperable cancer. I was on the chair being examined for 2 hours, 2 of the worst hours of my life. And in the middle of that exam, I saw with my eyes the children of Israel crossing dry land into freedom, and I was with them. And I saw the water closing behind us, and I saw us marching to freedom. And I literally saw it.
God is not limited by time. He's not limited by space. And so today, whether we live in Europe, whether we live in the United States, whether we live in Israel, the God of the Bible is available personally to each and every one of us.
The prosperity of America, the prosperity of the Western world, is that we've been so blessed. I mean, enormously blessed.
America is a very special case and place where God
has walked, whether in spirit or in reality. We are a blessed country. Of course, America was the New Jerusalem.
From the very beginning of this country, there were very strong roots in the biblical stories.
The idea of pilgrims and wandering and discovering the land, and also the connection to the soil and morality and law.
It's a brilliant law book, Genesis, precisely because it's a narrative. It gives the essence of democracy. All the 10 Commandments are based on experiences that happened in the book of Genesis before the law. So from a lawyer's point of view, the book of Genesis is the common law, the origins of the law before statutes, the law before the commandments.
America was founded on a Judeo-Christian ethic and principle. That being that we believe that our rights inherently come from God. The rights are not given to us by the government. The rights are given to us by God, and the government's job is to protect the rights that are God-given.
העניין was in die Unionen Gufe hat die Medina allein gemacht von a Yesod, bis wann es am hat es Kewehe gewähnt, auf dem Momen am Medina und auf dem Matbeis am Medina und auf Stori Kesse von der Medina, die zwei Iken, als mit gelebt in dem Eberschen, wie man sagt das auf Englisch, bis auch gedruckt. Und nachher der zweite Linie, man soll machen von Arabien, soll man machen an Einzigkeit.
These are challenging times for the United States. It used to be the case that America led the world, economically, militarily, culturally.
Tonight we wanted to mention the end of an era which might otherwise slip by without a lot of notice. That means NASA would be out of the business of doing that.
You are removing the only thing that gives people something to dream about tomorrow.
And it's not just space exploration. It's everything. We don't create anything. That's why our economy's in trouble. We don't protect the Earth. That's why our environment's in trouble. We don't trust government. And so it's easy to just sit back and be cynical and not do anything about it. But I was on a class field trip in 5th grade when I met Chicago's mayor, Richard Daley. In that moment, I truly believed that we were all on the same team, fighting for the same future, that we were all in fact a big family that cared for one another. I was inspired, and since then, I grew up to be cynical just like people I meet today. And cynicism is okay. It's healthy for a teenager, but then you have to grow up.
This is me and my daughter.
You have to grow from feeling cynical to being responsible. Responsibility means that we don't walk away from our problems. We face them. We solve them.
You look around today and you talk to people and you sense such distress. Something is not right. We're really heading in a bad direction.
Decline is real, but it's not the final answer, because there is a God.
So you said that you're an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
Do you still find the Bible to be meaningful when you read it?
Bits and pieces. If you could pick and choose parts of it, I'd say some of it is very meaningful, but some of it's ridiculous.
I think there's definitely great ideas in a lot of religious texts, but I just don't subscribe to any of them.
Anything you'd like to add as an atheist?
We're not bad people. We just
I don't think people think that.
You should be surprised. Atheists aren't bad people. We just need a little bit more proof than's presented to us.
God's messages and messengers rarely come in the wrapping we expect. So you expect when you walk into a sanctuary with stained glass, you're kind of tuned in to getting some kind of righteous message. But you don't expect that from the bag lady on the street. You don't expect it from the bum who stinks. You don't expect it from your spouse in the middle of a fight. And God uses all of those messengers.
You can be a blessing. That's one significant individual, a blessing to others.
And Abram came near and said, "Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked?" This is an incredibly interesting passage. It identifies that Abram's talking to the Lord, and he's arguing in favor of not destroying Sodom, which he's already indicated to Abram that's what his intent is, as he sends his 2 angels into the city.
God says, I'll spare it if I can find 10. You find 10 men, and I'll spare it.
What a moment of faith. Abraham, in his faith, knows that he can actually confront God.
And in this, we see exactly what it means to be a person of integrity and real moral leadership, to stand with courage and actually fight against the powers that be, even if that power is God, and proclaim what is just and what ought to be just in our society and how that could be manifest if we truly fight for it.
See, I don't think that the destruction of Sodom was necessarily about the sin that was in the city. Maybe the destruction was because the righteous did not say, I'm one. Here's one. Here's one who has not turned from God. Here's one who stands for the righteousness of God. Maybe it's a revelation that disaster and destruction may be caused by those who say nothing in the face of injustice, in the face of unrighteousness, in the face of ungodliness, than the emphasis on the ungodliness itself. I mean, wow, does that sound something like the Holocaust? Does that sound something like who spoke up or who did not speak up? Does that take us in any way back to what it caused, what it took to end slavery? That someone stood? That anyone stood? So were there hundreds and hundreds of years where no one stood? You know, maybe there's a revelation here of how we respond in the face of injustice, unrighteousness, ungodliness, more than the ungodliness itself.
So the first thing we can do is look at a narrative like that as a warning and say, this is not the kind of society that we want to create, right? And in what ways does contemporary American society actually reflect some of the worst tendencies of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah? And what can we do as a corrective in order to build out a society that's rooted in dignity and compassion instead of a kind of ethos of scarcity and cruelty instead?
I'm a Franciscan priest. I live and work here at St. Francis Inn, which is a soup kitchen and organization that does outreach to the homeless here in the Kensington section of Philadelphia, which is one of the poorer neighborhoods, not only in the city, but we've been told in the whole country. Franciscan spirit is that we work and live among the poor. And of course, we're firmly rooted in the scriptures, holy scriptures, right from the beginning of the Bible in the book of Genesis. Originally, about 30 years ago, there were other Franciscan friars, not myself, but they came down, and originally they were going to start a church in a poor neighborhood. When they came here, they saw such devastation, the abandoned lots, the garbage in the street, the cars all over the place, people walking up and down the street all night, prostitutes and open drug deals on the corner. They were here for about a month, and they said what Philadelphia does not need is another church with people talking about the scripture. They need to see it in action.
I could not believe my eyes. The amount of people living here in America, homeless and starving. There was a rule at the St. Francis Inn that families with small children enter and pick their food first. And then the rest came. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Almost 3 years.
Almost 3 years.
Yep.
Yeah, since our son was born.
So he doesn't know life without the inn?
No, he doesn't. They're his family.
It's like his family. We're not from Philadelphia. We're from New Jersey. We have no family in Philadelphia. And we fell on hard times. I got hit by a motorcycle. When my wife was pregnant, she had a staph infection. She has a heart infection. She got really sick. And they have helped us tremendously. Tremendously.
Thank God both of you are okay. How long have you been coming to the inn?
Periodically for about 10 years or more.
Did you serve in the Air Force?
14 and a half years.
We just got our son into Catholic school. He starts in September.
Thankfully, gratefully, because of the end.
Why do you think Father Michael and the rest of the friars open up the inn?
They see the need for something in this area for the less fortunate that are around here, and they try to give a hand to the people that don't want to help themselves.
And why do you think they do it and other people don't do it?
That's a good question.
They truly care, genuinely care, because of all the stuff we see them deal with. And
have to care.
Yeah, you would have to care.
It's amazing that they still come back every day.
Yeah, and they handle every problem with a smile, you know, and just kindness. I've never seen anybody angry, you know. Even when people are aggressive or on drugs or whatever.
Do you think the Bible's going to mean something to your son?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes.
He takes, like, you know, when people give him those church papers, you know, they hand them out. He'll be like, these are important papers, Mom. And he puts them up here, on a stroller, and keeps them up there.
We have the staff here, not only Franciscans, but also lay people. And we have a lot of young people that come here. And sometimes they come here for a whole year after they graduate from college. And they work with us, they live with us, and they pray with us. And it's a great experience for them, too, to see the scriptures come to action.
How long have you guys been working here?
This is my 12th year.
12 years?
10 years.
10 years.
This is my 4th trip.
4th trip?
Yep.
And what do you think?
I want to be here as a Franciscan volunteer minister next year.
I just recently graduated college last May from Creighton University, Jesuit Catholic University, and I was taking a Jesus Christ as Liberator course, and it inspired me to turn my faith into actual practice.
Wonderful.
I'm in the application process right now.
And what drove you to apply?
My first experience here, I definitely feel a calling to ministry and service to others.
Have you ever read the book of Genesis?
Yes.
And what does the book mean to you? What jumps out at you?
Book of Genesis. When I think of the book of Genesis, I think of God's creation and the good that he intended the world to be.
Why do you think the friars help? Why do you think they open up the doors and other people don't? They don't show up. Why do you think you show up?
Oh my gosh. Why do I show up?
Give it your best shot. Come on, Tim.
It's hope and there's promise. And what God intended for the world to be is in that book. And it's kind of up to us to fill in the gap. He kind of, you know, showed us the way in the Gospels, but in the book of Genesis, it was like, this is what I've created for you. And he made everything so beautiful and so all about us. And, you know, he showed us how to love, and he gave us love. And that's what it kind of speaks for me.
And how do you explain the difference, the gap between the beautiful world that God created and the world that everybody here at the inn experiences every day? The world of these people who stand by the gate at the sidewalk waiting to be fed every day. How do you explain the gap?
It is really hard to see it, but I see beauty in the small things. And honestly, that was like the one thing that I noticed when I came here, that even though there is so much turmoil, so much desperation and sadness all around, there really is this underlying joy. And these people have nothing, but they have taught me what it means to be thankful on a daily basis, to wake up and be thankful for the small things. And honestly, I see more beauty and hope here than I do on the streets downtown, because these people have hope and love in nothing. Whereas you go to these rich parts of the city and you can't even feel the same. So I don't really see that there is a gap.
It's tough because we can't get much help. They say we make too much money in our house and they don't want to give it. The government takes away your food stamp, so this is where we get to eat sometimes.
How often do you eat here?
Almost every day.
Every day?
Almost every day.
If there's something that you want people outside to know about the situation in here, what would you want people to know?
We're no different than them.
Then the Lord asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He answered, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?"
Yes, you are your brother's keeper. You, as my teacher Marshall Meyer used to say, we are our brother's keepers, we are our sister's keepers, we are the keepers of every man, woman, and child alive on this earth today, in particular the most vulnerable among us. Am I my brother's keeper? Of course you are.
We're not meant to live in spite of each other. The biblical record points us to relationship with each other and seeing the divine fingerprint that's in each other.
When I look and I see poverty, or I see hunger, or I see violence and hostility toward people, it's easy for me to say, you know what? It's not my neighborhood, not my family, not my problem. But that's an escape that I can't accept, because God's put me on this earth to be an instrument and a vessel for righteousness. And if there are righteous people, it has a way of preserving that culture and that society.
Personal responsibility is what life is about. We have to understand that every action that we do has huge ramifications. When we offer a kind word to someone who's hurt, when we give a hug to someone who's in need, what we really show is that we care about another human being.
There's only so much that each one of us can do, and yet that's not the argument to give up. It's the argument to work all the harder, I think.
You have to struggle for the goodness. Sometimes we'll make the appropriate and the right and the correct decisions. Sometimes we will not. But as we continue to struggle as a society, as a country, as individuals in leadership and people who are not in leadership, hopefully, even though the struggles may be difficult, we will grow in the process. We will be blessed, and we will be better people and a better society after that struggle.
When our founders boldly declared America's independence to the world and our purposes to the Almighty, they knew that America, to endure, would have to change. Not change for change's sake, but change to preserve America's ideals.
All great change in America begins at the dinner table. So tonight in the kitchen, I hope the talking begins. And children, if your parents haven't been teaching you what it means to be an American, let them know and nail them on it. That would be a very American thing to do.
I say Genesis. What's the first thing that comes to mind?
The first book of the Bible.
The Bible?
The Bible.
Bible.
The Bible.
The first book of the Old Testament.
Bible.
Bible. God.
It's a clear confirmation that God is everything in all things.
Beginning.
Beginning.
The beginning of the Bible, how it all started, how it originated.
You know, a path, a way of living.
I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn in Genesis.
Do you teach it to your children?
I do. You don't? Yes, I do.
And Judah said to Israel, his father, "Send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and you, and also our little ones."
Jacob sends Benjamin to Egypt. It's because he knows that God cares about the future and that God's faithfulness will endure through all generations.
This is really a family society and not an individual society. We tend to talk about an individualist society, but it really isn't. It's a family society. One of the most curious things to me in observation is that almost all people value the utility which their children will get from consumption higher than they value their own. Here are parents who have every reason to expect that their children will have a higher income than they ever had. And they scrimp and save in order to be able to leave something for their children.
So where would you find immortality? But in looking around and seeing what you and your wife brought into this world and fostered. And that's a beautiful thing. And that I don't have that as a Sullivan. I do envy my two brothers and other friends that send me at Christmas time the family picture. And I see first kids, and then I start seeing grandkids. And then with my really senior friends, great-grandkids.
If all we do is live for what we can have, what we can see in the present, whether it's something material, or even if it's so that our name can, be lit up in Times Square, when we die, what does that mean? But if we invest ourselves in our children and in our grandchildren. If we leave something, not as certificate of deposit or a stock portfolio, but if we leave something of integrity, something that is eternal, something that cannot be devalued, then we leave something that really has lasting value. And through that, it is one of the ways in which we live beyond our own lifetime.
It's really a theme that started in the book of Genesis. Always leave something better for your descendants.
And yet we see in our own country here in America decisions being made today that contradict that.
We in the United States and maybe around the world are dodging that sense of accountability to our children and grandchildren in terms of deeper changes that are taking place in our society, and we're ignoring them.
This is our first task, caring for our children. If we don't get that right, we don't get anything right. That's how, as a society, we will be judged. And by that measure, can we truly say, as a nation, that we're meeting our obligations? Can we honestly say that we're doing enough to keep our children safe from harm?
Thank God I don't have a child in that school, but as a parent, we all know what that is. We just all know what that is. You drop your kid off and you don't see him again? Honestly, that's really life now? That's what it's going to be?
Can we say that we're truly doing enough to give all the children of this country the chance they deserve to live out their lives in happiness and with purpose? I've been reflecting on this the last few days, and if we're honest with ourselves, the answer is no.
My awakening coincided with the birth of my first child. Since that moment, every decision I make is driven by my family. None of this predicament that we're in today is irreversible. It's only irreversible if we do nothing.
Here we are at Genesis land and Israel in the desert, and we're going to relive Abraham's journey riding on his camels.
We have to change the decisions that we make. We have to speak to each other in conversation. We have to consider ourselves as one big family. We have to expect more out of everyone. We have to hold our children closer than ever. We have to teach them more than ever before. And we have to push our children to be better in every respect. Change for the future has to begin with how we treat ourselves and our children today.
I've had the wonderful advantage of being able to teach Genesis as well as read it. And I would say that it comes to mean more, as you would expect, when you are yourself a creator. That is to say, when you have children. The book means something completely different when you raise a child, because then all the conflicts and the pain and the joy and the pride that is repeated over and over again with God's creation of Adam and Eve and the way that they leave him and the way that Abraham and Sarah try to create a family and the fracture that all of that entails, it comes alive when you have a child.
If I was stuck on a desert island and had one FedEx box and could get one book to teach the students who were stuck with me on the island, I would order the book of Genesis. I can't imagine a more relevant book to today's life. It talks about everything.
We live in a time of fractured humanity. We live in a time of sectarian distrust. I think we live in a time of, again, man creating God, man creating authority in his own image.
We do live in a postmodern context in which there is no shared authoritative text. And so I carry my Bible into the conversation, and you carry your Deepak, and somebody else carries their Oprah, and somebody else carries something else. There is something to be taken seriously about a text that has been authoritative for communities of people for over 3,000 years.
I wish more people would go back and read it with a fresh mind, a fresh heart, and fresh eyes, and I think they would find that there's a remarkable contemporary application to Genesis.
Here we are on beach cleanup day, and we're going to go clean up the beach as a family.
Genesis is the roadmap for my life. Society today faces so many problems, and Genesis addresses them all. If we all follow Genesis as our collective compass, the world would be a better place.
Do we throw our garbage on the beach?
No.
And how do you feel?
I feel good. This is really important. I'm really glad that we're here teaching our kids the importance of taking care of nature, especially with the new one on the way.
Family of 4, soon to be 5.
I can't tell you how to live your life. Nobody can. But I can invite you to join me in taking a small step. One small step in the right direction to help make the world better. And deep down, we all know we're capable of a single small step for the better.
Humankind have the challenge of freedom of will, and you have to make your life what it's all about.
We have responsibility to do what we need to do in circumstances, and then God will bless those.
Living is not life. Living is an obligation. Life is a celebration. And the question is, what is our vision for the future?
I pray that this project will challenge us to rethink us, to rethink this present time, to zoom the lens out and to ask some tough questions and to ask questions that are not always easily answered, but to recognize that there is a continuity of life. There is a revelational unity of life that is ultimately traced back to the God who was and is to come.
I say Genesis, you say
Exodus.